there, it's Erin with Time Saving Templates, and in this video I'm going to be going over a question that came up about the difference between inflation and a cost of living adjustment. If you haven't seen the last video, I showed how to download inflation rates for almost all different countries from the IMF website. So I'll be sure to link to that video. We downloaded that report, looked at a few specific countries and their inflation rates, but I didn't really dive into what that means for HR or compensation. If you are working in HR and compensation and you come across this information, so I did go over a couple very brief examples of what you could do with these inflation rates, but I didn't really dive into how the inflation rate is determined per country or what that really means. So a couple of ways that I had mentioned in the previous video was using the salary ranges reset template to just refresh your salary ranges if you want to take inflation into consideration. Doesn't mean you're just taking the inflation rate and automatically increasing your ranges. There's a lot of factors to consider. And then same with the merit worksheet that I mentioned. That is just another template or resource for you to have that you can get at Time Saving Templates. And inflation rate may be something that you use to help you do your merit budget or your merit increase. But hopefully along with other information such as salary surveys and that sort of thing. But let me get back into the file. Okay, so now that we have the data downloaded, we have the years we wanted to look at, we have the countries. Now I'm going to step back and think about what are we really looking at here. These are annual inflation rates per country, but as someone in HR and compensation, what do we actually do with this information? For 2025, at 2.9, it's pretty similar to last year's and predicted to go down slightly. So what do we do with this information? That brings me to a question. What is the difference between the inflation rate versus a cost of living adjustment? And would we just take the rate that is listed here and give a cost of living adjustment to everybody in the US for 2.9%? And what about countries where there's a negative, this is the predicted model, which is interesting. And then Argentina, extremely volatile. If you look across the years, 1 year it's a 48% inflation. Last year, 200% inflation. Makes it look like a 35% prediction is going down. So I actually have a series that I've done in the past on compensation management. I will link to that or add this video to the list. So there's already a few things going over cost of living, geodifferentials, relocation analysis. And there was one slide that helped to explain cost of living. Okay, so this is one I covered previously where I was looking at cost of living versus cost of labor. And so when we're looking at the IMF data, that CPI index, the way they come up with that is described here in cost of living. They're looking at the difference year over year in expenses like housing, food, healthcare, what it costs people to maintain the same standard of living year over year, and is there a difference next year to maintain the same standard of living that person maintained in the previous year. So that's what that percentage is looking at within one country year over year. What is the percentage change? That video went over cost of labor, which I won't really cover much here, but that's looking at what are companies paying for different jobs. So that's a little bit different than this. So cost of living versus inflation now. So I have cost of living and I added adjustment because if you're in HR, you're doing a cost of living adjustment, that is different than inflation rate. The adjustment is the employer's decision that they make, and it could be based on inflation, and it can also be based on many other factors, such as what is the company policy when someone relocates, what is the policy overall for handling increased in cost of living. The intent for the cost of living adjustment is to protect the employee's purchasing power. We don't want someone decreasing over time. And yeah, it can be based on the company budget, is based on cost of living indexes that they can purchase from other companies, not just from IMF. IMF happens to be free and have a lot of data, but there are a lot of other options and tools that you can use to estimate or calculate what you would want to do for adjustments. Now, the IMF inflation rate, it's national, per each country. There's one rate for each country. It measures the average price increases. And yeah, and then these are the examples: 6.3 projected inflation for one country versus a cost of living adjustment. A company decides to increase the pay between 4 and 7% to account for inflation. You could also see cost of living adjustment as a separate adjustment or separate line item, so not added to base pay. It could be temporarily they're giving adjustments until they get to the point that it equals out or gets added to base. So I have seen both of those scenarios. And so the connection with IMF's inflation rate that we're looking at in their spreadsheet versus what you might do with it in HR, cost of living adjustment. Basically, it's a data point that you can use to build a case or to help balance out with other data points. So you could be using other tools. You could be looking at the internal budget, company policy, and that's all part of helping the company decide what to do in these cases. Just because the IMF inflation rate says one thing doesn't mean that it's an automatic or standard increase that every company gives, especially because if you look back at the data, some of the year over year, there can be a huge difference. And so you, in HR, you need to be able to manage expectations. Not every year is going to be a year where you give 8% increases across the board. In fact, I don't think it was even in 2022 with this higher inflation. I don't think it was common in very many companies I saw to match that high of an inflation rate. But then as the rate goes down, it doesn't mean that the budget should go down either, because everything is based on the actual budget and what the company can afford to pay as well. So there's just so many factors to consider. This is just one data point, but it's nice to have something that you can use in combination with other sources, and this is free. So I hope that helps explain what the inflation rate is and also how you can get this data for multiple countries on the IMF website. Okay, so I will add that video here into the page that has several videos on working with compensation and locations. And don't forget that I also have some free resources that you can find here at timesavingtemplates.com/free resources. We have a free compensation metrics cheat sheet that can help you get started with understanding comp specific metrics, as well as some other video series that you might enjoy. Please and subscribe and stay tuned for the next videos where I'll go over some of the other options of what we can download from IMF and how that could apply to an HR compensation use case scenario. So stay tuned for that, and don't forget that I am here to help you streamline and save time when it comes to using your Excel spreadsheets. Thanks.